I want to thank Jake for his very generous compliment and comments. Go tell my wife that somebody likes me. And then she'll tell my kids that, and they'll say, oh, no, they don't know him. I also need to thank Kate. She is phenomenal. I think the local government commission is very, very, very fortunate to have her as executive director. She is just and we have her on one side of the dinner table, then you have Glenn and Julie at the other side of the table. You look at and they're being really modest, but I say to myself, Lord, why did you do this to me? I mean, you know, they're in an atmosphere, they're way up here, and I'm just down here, and they're phenomenal talent. It is an honor to be here. I always wanted to come to these. I grew up in Spokane, Washington, and I didn't go to National Forest for a long time. I'm not right here, I'll tell you what I did, but most of the time I didn't. And then when I retired, I said, why would I continue to put off what I always wanted to do? I've always wanted to see Assembly Falls. And I say why? I don't know why. But tomorrow, I am going to see those falls, and it's going to be very magical to my life. So it is great being here. I think this is a hard place for anybody to get an argument, because why would you argue in a place that is as beautiful as this national park? It is fabulous. I like local governments, and when people always ask me, you know, now that I'm retired and I can be really candid about everything. I'm not running for office, I'm not holding office, I don't have to be as diplomatic, but I tell people that there's several levels of government. Federal government isn't meant to be moving very quickly, and you don't want that. You don't want a government that is buffeted. You don't need a buffeted national government. It moves very slowly. But the one thing the federal government can do is it can make things viral like no government can. And so I enjoyed it was an honor for the presidents. The story is I got a call at my office and they said to me, the president of the Constitution Committee is on the phone. I said, oh yeah, right. This is a group of people wanting to know whether I'm going to run for a fourth term. So they handed me the phone and I hung up. And then they called again and they said, this is the President of the Constitution Committee, let's talk to Executive Sims. So I said, give them to security. So they gave it to my security staff, and my security said, no, they are. So this person on the phone was talking to me, and I said, now my goal was I had been in office for 25 years. I had been the county executive for 3 full terms. And so I really wanted somebody in Washington, D.C. I could talk to. That was my goal. I just wanted to go there and actually be welcome, to be able to talk about new ideas, not have people dismiss them. And so I really wanted, so I had a whole list of names of people who I thought should be in the administration. So I was just telling them, here's the topic on transportation for this person. And here, now, this went on and on and on. So the person said, well, thank you very much. And then he called back and said, well, can you come back and meet staff? So I said, sure. And he said, in Chicago, but don't tell anybody. I said, well, I'm not, but I'll be glad to meet staff. So I went back to Chicago. I had a briefing book this thick. I knew every single, I knew where the commas were, I knew where the periods were. It was like taking an exam. I didn't want to be questioned and look stupid. So it was really comprehensive on a number of issues affecting governments. And so I go downstairs from the federal building, they take me upstairs, they put me in a small room. I'm sitting there with my briefing book, I'm going through it. And who walks in? President-elect Obama. I went, oh, wow. I said, he's going to take me in front of all of his staff and then find out how really stupid I am. So I'm walking with him, starstruck, and down this hallway, and all of a sudden, there's no staff. He takes me into his office. And so he says, have a seat. I have no idea which one is his, so I make no move. You know, so he walks up and learns on his mouth. He says, no, sit anywhere. So I do make a move, but I don't take a seat. And because I still don't know which one is his. And he says, turns out he says, look up, sit anywhere you want to. I promise you I will not sit on your lap. So I said, he sits next to me for about 40 minutes. And we're talking about an array of issues, an array of them. Then he says, I'd like to have you in my administration. I said, Mr. President, has anybody told you no? He says, I don't know. Has anybody told me no? So I called my wife and said, I just made a career change. I love local governments. I tell people every day. I enjoy my experience working with the staff in the federal government. I enjoy the capacity and the talent that's there. But I love local governments. Let me tell you why. In this country, if the local governments are not fully engaged in change, it will never occur. You know, those are the governments where, when I went back as a Deputy Secretary of HUD to Seattle, people would say, hi, you're doing a good job. They had no idea what I was doing. They didn't know. I mean, who cares what HUD's doing? I mean, they had no idea. When I was a county executive, my wife quit going anywhere with me. We'd go into Costco, people say, got a minute? And I was saying to my wife, they're my bosses, so I'm going to talk to them. I'd go to a restaurant. I remember going to a restaurant on our anniversary, and the waiter kept walking by, and it was really wonderful. And then he says, I know this is your anniversary. I just want this much time. So, and the reason, you know, is they know what you're doing, and they know what they want. And so local government is inescapably the change agent in this country. Our greatness will be determined by the quality of local governments, not by state governments. I mean, they're good too. They're good too. But they are, again, another level of government that isn't down into what I would call the weeds and the roots and the nutrient value of the citizenry. It is local government. And so you have an incredible responsibility. When people thought I was going to run when I came back, and why, I did not know why, and I told my kids, because I used to coach kids, and I used to tell the kids the worst thing to see is an athlete who played one game or one season too long. And if I ran with them, I would be playing one game or one season too long. There's a time to sit back and watch other people aspire and have the energy to make change. So I want to talk about the issues that I saw in King County, on the issues of race and equity, and how we got there. But first I want to talk about, Jake raised the issue about, do we own a forest? Let me tell you the story behind the forest. I was at a meeting just like this. Now, my staff never wanted me in a meeting like this, because I'd hear speakers and jot down their ideas, and I would come back. And I would say, here's what we're going to do. So what happened was we had a speaker talking about the importance of forests. Now, I'm an urban person. I was sitting there going, hold a second, this is really neat. So I kept going to all the forestry sessions. And so at the very end of the meeting, they asked some of us to get up and make a comment about what we saw. And I got up and I said, King County's going to buy 100,000 acres of forest property. And I didn't know there was anybody from Seattle there. It ended up in the paper. King County's going to buy 100,000 acres of forest. So my staff came to me and said to me, how are we going to do that? I said, you know, ladies and gentlemen, I have no idea, but I know you're going to do that. Because I had a philosophy that my job was to let smart people do what smart people can. And when I left county executive, we had 197,000 acres of forest property. And the single largest local acquisition of 92,000 acres in the United States. So what you can do when you go to sessions like this is you have no idea the power of what you learn and the power of what you can accomplish by just mentioning to somebody, I have a really neat idea. I went back to Washington, D.C. with my kids and my wife to an event. And I said to my kids, there's a press conference over at the National Center, and I want you to go over there. National Center is an African-American think tank. And I said, I want you to go over there and get the Dellins report. Congressman Dellins had retired, he led this commission. And the issue was, what was going to happen to African-American males in particular? And I said to my kids, pick up all the literature you can, but only one copy. And my kids said, well, how do you know it's going to be more than one copy? I said, it's a press conference in Washington, D.C. There's always only one copy, gentlemen. So they came back with quite a large volume of one copies. And then I remember I said, well, everybody says, well, Dad, look at the summary page. And the summary page was very interesting. The summary page said that 36% of all African-American males in the United States of America would have nothing in common with the rest of the United States except their death. That's it. And I remember going, whoa. So I went, and I said, my kids said, Dad, you know, this is hardcore inner city stuff. And I said, oh, okay. So I took it back, to a person named Chandler Felt. He was one of my staffers. Chandler does all of our census stuff. He's a demographer. He has a very deep voice, which I wish I had. You know, he sits in this corner. I said, Chandler, can you read this stuff and interpret it for me? Because I have no idea. I want to make sure this is not happening in King County. Can you read it and tell me? So I would go back to Chandler, because he's a data person. I mean, he's a data. He would say, it's coming. It's coming. It's coming. So I was at the Urban League because they're giving a speech, and Chandler told me it was going to be coming soon. So I got up and said, we're going to have a report very soon on the issues of African Americans in King County. And all of a sudden the newspapers would say, oh wow, so Brian Simpson announces. So I said to Chandler, you really got to give a report. I had no idea what had happened. Chandler took that report, and he brought in every data system we had in King County. Public health data, transportation data, land use data. Went to a group of mathematicians that developed predictive models, and from that report, we could say easily, with absolute certainty, that we can predict the life outcomes of residents by their zip code. And when I went back to Washington, D.C., we talked about that. And when in a meeting with the president says, I want you to promise that when we will have a system where zip codes are an address and never again a life determinant. And so one thing I learned about the federal government is they can put a lot of money behind an idea. But in fact, we can do that. We now know that there are disparities in the country. We cannot dismiss them anymore. We know they are there. We know that how we plan and how we build influences those disparities. So you look at neighborhoods, and we used to get health data, and we would say, okay, if you're in 9144 where I'm at, if you're African American male, you're likely to live in your mid-80s. If you're likely, if you have diabetes, to have a pill. And we know what your medication is going to be, what your likely age is going to be. If you're in 98118, which is right next to mine, life expectancy for African male is 68. Now, we're not talking about violent death. We're just talking about the fact that they are likely to have amputations and not have what we call pills to drive it. Totally different outcomes. One compromises one physically, and the other one allows a person to continue with a rather higher quality of life. Now, people say, is that intentional? We don't, and people say it's got to be income-based. The answer is, healthcare is not income-based. It is practice-based. It is what they perceive. Medicare and Medicaid would pay for the same things I get. That's what they would do if you run those systems. It is practice-based. So it allows us to basically say, we could tell you that a child, we could predict the lifetime earnings of a child. We could say if they're in 98118, here's lifetime earnings. If they're 9144, this is lifetime earnings. Lifetime earnings of children. Now, you know, I have 3 kids. I love them now. Because they're financially emancipated. And I like them as well. They're really great sons. But again, when you're looking at your children, you would never assume that somebody else would hold the keys, the ignition keys to their lifetime earnings. But every person in city government and every person who approves a plan makes that decision. Makes it. It's a winner or a loser decision. It may not be intentional, but it is clearly impactful and profound. Let me tell you some of the ways that we know that happens. We were looking at, earlier we were talking about community gardens, and I was saying, when I was at HUD, you know, people came to my office, Justice Department, they said, I wonder if they're coming here to indict me. I mean, Justice Department wants to see you right away. I'm going to go, oh God, it's really great. That's not good news normally. So Justice Department walks in, and they have these, 5 people, and they sit down, and they say to me, Mr. Sims, we heard you give a speech on community gardens. And so we decided to look at community gardens in a number of different areas and the crime rates around them. And the crime rates around community gardens and in those neighborhoods is really low. And they said, so why did you think that, Mr. Sims? I said, because community gatherings are gathering points. They allow people who don't know their neighbors to know their neighbors. And on top of that, they allow them to look out and see who shouldn't be in the neighborhood. So I said they become collector points. And I said, so we don't believe that that's important, but it's always have been important. We've always been a species, if you want to go there, or a culture or a civilization that gathers itself. And in fact, we used to do that in force, and then we created walls, and we called them cities hundreds of years ago, but nonetheless, we do gather, and it provides a system of support. We can tell you that you're going to be obese if you're not, we can tell you whether you're an adult or whether or not you're a young person. If you don't have a park within a mile of your home, you're going to be obese. We can tell you you're going to be, I mean, that kind of obese, you will be obese. A half mile, a little less, or a quarter mile, non-existent. People will talk about community centers. We said community centers are fine, but parks, pocket parks, are even more important. Where you might just have a basketball hoop, and somebody says, why? It says, because my sons were much better athletes than I were, so they were elite. And so, community centers are a mean place to be, because if you ain't got game, you don't play. And the worst thing to do is to bring a young person in there and say, here, in a boys club, or girls club, or whatever, YMCA, and say, I want you to play basketball. If you don't have game, you don't play. And the courts are cruel. What pocket parks allow is everybody to do Michael Jordan. Everybody can do Michael Jordan. So what were the advantages of parks? Kids got active. So we can say if you're a quarter mile from a park, you're going to be active. You're going to be active. And what does it mean? All that work that we're trying to do in telling people to be fit, you don't have a kid sitting home saying, I need to eat less sugar. You have somebody out there being active. And it works really, really, really well. Senior citizens walking. People say, what do our senior citizens need to be walking? I'm a senior citizen now, so I have really strong feelings about it now. I now know that what I've been saying is correct, or I would try to validate it. I was talking to some of the mayors. I was talking to the mayors about. He said, you know, there's been a series of transitions as people age in their communities. We don't see them walk as much, and especially if they have a younger, new ethnic population. So African Americans who are senior citizens do not walk very much in Latino neighborhoods. And somebody says, is that culture? And I said, really? I said, can you see around the corner? He said, well, what? I said, can they see around the corner? Because I said, an example I use them, I said, on I-5 going to the middle of Seattle, if you're going south, when you're on the north side of the University Bridge, you slow down, it backs up traffic a gazillion miles, then you're on top of it, you have nobody in front of you. When you're on the south side and you're going north, you do the same thing, you slow down, it backs up traffic all the way down and down Seattle, you get on top and see nobody's in front of you and you speed up. We as a species never ever run over the top of a hill or slow down. So senior citizens are asked to walk fast when they can't see around the curve. Our predators always were around that wall. So I said what you need to do is knock out the corners of the wall. We design these square buildings, and we do it a lot of them, and then say, walk around them. If you watch people, as we found, New York City is a prime example. Where do people walk most of the time? They walk closer to the street than they walk to the building because you have an escape chance. That is not because they need to escape, it is because intuitively, everybody in this room wants the ability to escape. All of us want that. So we move away from the building. A building where you can see through the other side or that around it, you can get through that. So in King County, what we encourage the housing authority to do is to create bulbs, that is streets where people could either sit on benches on the corner or to take away the corners. I gave a speech like this to the ULI in Seattle. They went to downtown, they actually had an architect who decided to say, get the city to agree with them to play with buildings, and South Lake Union, those buildings were packed. His customer levels were up, now everybody else is doing that. See through the buildings. See through the buildings. Now what does all this mean about race and equity? Neighborhoods of color don't get these. They're squared off neighborhoods, are less likely to have community gardens, really less likely to have that, less likely to have wide sidewalks that are well lit, less likely to have every single feature that allows for movement. And people say, what about access to fresh food? I'm going to say, no, because we can't materially say that much anymore. What we can say, though, is that neighborhood design in poor neighborhoods has had a monumental effect that has created and sustained disparities for generations. And nobody can debate that anymore because it is conclusive fact. You sat there not with ill intentions. They just simply said, what do they need? If a new rule coming out of the federal government on affirmative furthering for housing says two things. One is, affirmative furthering always meant if you needed opportunity, you moved out of the neighborhood. So a group of us said, forget that, that's old. We gotta move? No, rebuild our neighborhoods. And the rules say two ways to accomplish and provide equality in America is one, to allow people to move out of their neighborhoods, and the other one is to rebuild them to the same kinds of standards. I'll give you another one. In King County, when we're looking at our data, we said British people obviously do not like fast foods because we did not see a lot of neon in their neighborhoods, right? But in poor neighborhoods, there was a neon sign everywhere. Around high schools in rich neighborhoods, they didn't have that. At the school that Bill Gates went to, and they took their kids to, school that my son went to, Cattle Prep, they didn't have a lot of fast food around. They didn't. But you go to public schools where poor people are served, they have every single fast food franchise in America is within 100 feet. And so we want to know why they are fed, why they get obese, and we want to know why they have poor dietary habits. It's because we make a zoning decision that it's okay in a poor neighborhood to have a lot of fast food. We do not make same decisions in neighborhoods that are more affluent. Cities will control that, but what is worse is this. Everything I described to you is body altering. There's a field called epigenetics. Which signals are sent? We all believe our genes are static and are in concrete. And they're not. They change sometimes by the minute, sometimes over the hour, sometimes over a week's time, but they fundamentally change. I'll give you an example. The City of Seattle just passed a pre-K funding method, so every kid in Seattle who is prior to kindergarten can be educated. So I said, you know, you're going to get the same results that you get from grades 1 to 12. I can tell you that already. He said, why? I said, you've got to measure cortisol. Cortisol is every human being does it. If I were all of a sudden to pull out, if I were all of a sudden to get really angry and start leaping and jumping on people here, your cortisol levels would go up. It's a fear response. So, but you think differently when we have cortisol in the system than when you think it doesn't, and when you don't. So we got kids going to school and they have high cortisol. And they don't learn. Then everybody gets frustrated because they're not learning. You cannot process information with the same cortisol level. So people say, well, it's got to be genetically inherited. No, it's not. Cortisol is exhibited after birth. We all have cortisol capacity. All of us does. The amount is determined by the environment we're in. People say it's poor families. Only in part. What happens with those kids is a feeling of not being safe. We say, well, how does a kindergartner, or how does a kid, whether they're 3, 4, or 5, how do they know whether they're unsafe or not? And I want to say to you, we have no idea that human beings are capable of doing. We now know children see signals all the time. And so if you're in an environment where either the people around you, or it looks unsafe, you go to school, have cortisol, and you will not learn in school. You will not learn in school. So something as simple as, why isn't a kid behaving in a classroom? Is because they are processing information differently with cortisol than they would without it. You might say, now who told you that? In fact, that's pretty established data. We know that because we know what happens to starving children. The World Health Organization has done more cortisol work and more genetic work than anybody in the whole world. And I'm now beginning to explain the relationship between genetic change and why it occurs and behavioral issues. And so we sit here and we say, wow, I didn't know I was playing with another human being. No, you're not playing with them. You're molding and shaping them, and you're influencing their outcomes. So what does it mean what we can do? It means when we look at data, and I love data. I mean, Chandler felt it's simple. He could explain it around 1 + 1 is 2, and so 2 looks like this. So it really was really helpful to me. You look at data. People who tell me they don't want data don't want change. And the data available at the local level is so incredible. I chair the Health Benefit Exchange, which is implementing the ACA in the state of Washington. And so we artfully play with data. But here's what I tell people right now. Somebody said, are you really worried about health insurance in America? I said, yes, I actually am. Because I can tell you right now, the health cost is still growing faster than rate of inflation. And people say, well, how would you change that? I would say, I would change the drivers. And the drivers are neighborhood design. It comes down to issues of parks and playgrounds and community gardens and wider streets and better lighting. Making sure that homes are built without having toxic materials in them and flows in them. Because the healthcare system will go on ration. When we used to sit there, and there was a group of us that they had, I don't know, they call us all kinds of names. But our issue was to get a lot of data and then say what the consequence was going to be. And I said, wow, this is not good. Because it means during my children's lifetime, we will begin to alter healthcare delivery systems in the United States. There will be winners and losers. They may be insured, but there will be winners and there will be losers because the system can't pay for itself. So we can sit back here and say the world is fine because now everybody's insured. I want to say, no, it's really important what's insured. The real issue is, can we get healthcare costs down? And it's the built environment. It's not the doctor. Doctors can do some, hospitals can do some, but the real drivers are the city policies. What we put in place. Whether we have a lot of neon signs or fewer of them. What kinds of amenities we put in place. All the things that we signal saying to them that they're welcome. I can remember the time people said, people in South Seattle, I live in South Seattle, Gary Locke lived in South Seattle, Norm Rice lived in South Seattle, and there was an article in the New York Times where it said that the first time in U.S. history, the top 3 executive offices in the state were held by people of color. Norm Rice, Gary Locke and I met at SEED. I chaired it, they were the vice chairs of it, and that was an organization in Southeast Seattle demanding that Seattle pay attention to Southeast Seattle, which is where most of the people of color lived. And we said we wanted change. A lot of changes occurred. When we were standing on top of the roof taking a picture talking about, wow, can you believe we're going to have light rail? Can you believe what Hope 6 is doing now? Can you believe the wider streets? Can you believe we actually have stoplights now? Can you believe that we have lit crosswalks? Can you believe the streets have been made wide? Can you understand that we now have mixed housing? Everybody said mixed housing never worked. You can never have mixed housing. I've heard that till the cats come home. The issue is, will rich people live around poor people? The answer is people will live in good neighborhoods no matter where they're built. And the idea of saying it's either going to be a poor neighborhood or a rich neighborhood and standing back and saying that's okay is absolutely wrong. It is wrong. It's wrong for healthcare costs, it's wrong for social costs, and it's wrong for our economic viability. People say, why, when we ask why, I'm in a state where it rains all the time. Rain. I mean, it rain. We're getting our rain. We get delayed claims because we've had it longer. We've been getting this rain. So we should say, why would you live in Seattle? Why would seniors stay in Seattle? We don't have seniors actually in Seattle very much. It's really interesting in the metropolitan area that the number of people who stay. People like me who will say, I don't mind visiting, but I'm not ready to move yet. I have no idea I'm doing that, but I like doing that, but I'm not alone. Seattle is it's the fastest growing city in the United States today. The metropolitan area is one of the fastest growing metropolitan areas. But why? We sat down with Bill Gates, I'll never forget sitting down with him, and his issue was, he's really short at times, and he says, and we were looking at the fact that he was about to move an incredible amount of his business development to other places in the world. So we asked him, what would it take for you? What would it take for you to have people stay here? You stay here. What would it take? He said, I want preservation of green areas. I want parks. I want bicycle paths. I mean, he went down all these simple things, all of them green, every one of them, every one of them. He said, when people move up here, I really want to move into an area where they believe they're going to be challenged. They might challenge at work, but they want to enjoy life. And so I want to make sure that you are committed as a county government and a city government to meeting our standards, because that's what attracts people. And all of a sudden we found all these people moving in. And why do they move in? Because they say it's an amenity-free area. You got all these, it looks beautiful. We went after forests and passed a law as a constitutional amendment for our county. It says that all that acreage that we gathered, 197,000 acres, cannot be changed unless it's replaced 1 for 1. Right? So if you buy an acre, you got to show us you bought another acre in a similar, in the same area of the same environmental value. Because you know, people complain about elk herds. We have people in our area that do. But we said the elk were running through that property, but long before you go on them, we're really sorry, but elks don't go over fences, they go through them. So the issue is that there needs to be a balance, and we wanted to strike that balance. But again, going back to the issues of racial disparities, I want to talk about them for a second. Racial disparities is a very significant issue in this country, and dividing it very deeply. Isabel Wilkerson gave a speech at Yale University. She wrote a wonderful book called The Warmth of the Suns, S-U-N-S. It's an amazing book. And she said, you know, America has not resolved she said she was asked a question by the faculty at Yale University and some of the major funders. And the question that the faculty asked is, can you tell us about racism? She said, I want to back up a little bit and tell you what we're dealing with. Latinos face racism. Asians face racism. Black Americans were never brought over here on a racial basis. They live in a caste system. In her research, African Americans were hung and jailed and shot and disappeared for behavioral issues which are endemic to caste, which is far more pernicious. And she says, and we become really, people erupt and it goes away. Then erupt and they go away. And we don't understand that the caste is a caste system. I went, whoa, but I never heard anybody say it was a caste system. Then she says, but medically, actually, it's actually it, because the cortisol I talk about also exists for people in caste systems as well. So her issue is that America is at a precipice that he doesn't realize it's at, how dangerous it is, because it cannot be sustained. You cannot have people subject to racism and another group subject to caste and have that full volume be the majority of the country. And that's what's going to take place without consequence. And so her issue when she was asked, how would you solve it? She says, I would have every neighborhood look great. That's what she said. I went, whoa, that's interesting. Every neighborhood look great. Because the data is overwhelming. Every neighborhood has to look great. So the really key is whether you like researchers, because hey, ask the question. Ask who gets sick. You know, the mayor of Phoenix, we were talking, when I was the county executive, and my son was thinking about going to the issue, which is what he did, traitor. And he was saying, you know, we did the infrared studies over Phoenix. I said, infrared? He said, yeah, you haven't done that yet? Well, I mean, he obviously knew I didn't do it, otherwise he wouldn't have said it that way. So he did infrared all over what they call the Maricopa County. What's hot, what's cold. So they found out that the airport is really hot at night. Remember the temperature, the daytime temperatures of it used to be that the daytime temperature was was affecting the area. Under climate change, it's nighttime temperature, which has gone up 12 degrees. So they were looking at hot areas. So I said, wow, the airport, I had to be hot, I had to be really hot. Yeah, the airport was hot. What else did you think was hot? I said, I had an idea. He said, every poor neighborhood with Latinos and African Americans in it was the hottest airport. So I said, what was your consequences for a hot neighborhood? He said, 911 calls, both for violence and for healthcare issues. People got sick. So I said, so how do you do it? He said, well, we're going to go back in those neighborhoods because we have to change materials. So ASU had made a decision to develop a new materials department so they could figure out what people should put on their roofs and what people should have as building materials to keep the homes cool. You should never sentence a neighborhood. The second city was Chicago. I adore Florence. Why? I love the fact that they have art. I love the open spaces. They walk a lot in Florence. I love the sense of, you always wanted to walk. And walking was not unenjoyable, even late at night. It was just something that made you want to get out of your hotel and walk all over the city. Oh yeah, did I enjoy the cathedrals, and did I enjoy the incredible artwork? Yes, and did. And I remember walking down there seeing Michelangelo's David, and I was, in that awful, the closer you get, the more mesmerized you get, and then when you're right upon David, you keep walking around and around the circle, and you can't walk away because it's such an extraordinary sculpture. That's what you are, sculptors. And the issue is whether or not you're going to have a Michelangelo's David that you have sculpted with your skills and your abilities and your positions, or do you want something significantly less than that? bronze art, which nobody could recognize. And that's the choices that we have. You assume the positions, and now you're learning that there are responsibilities in those positions. And you can't say, oh, it's not my fault. No, it is nobody's fault. It's institutional fault. It is our ability to say, it's okay, we'll get to it, without realizing that we need to get those measurements. And then we need to know what our investments are. Now, I'm county executive. We have 100, and at the time I was there, 117 miles of paved bicycle trail. Paved. They were really nice. And I remember being very embarrassed by the report that Chandler did when I realized that we had not one of them in a poor community. Not one. And we used to bicycle. There's an annual ride called Saddle to Portland. And I remember telling my friend Rod Brandon, there ain't enough people that looking like us, Rod. I mean, you know, we're kind of out here, one of the few. But if you don't have safe paths, what are people going to do? So Greg Nichols, the mayor of Seattle, decided to build a new trail, which he did, over Beacon Hill. It's packed all the time, with walkers and riders. When the opportunity presented itself, people used it. So again, those are decisions that you can make, who has and who does not, and communities have and have not. People used to assume that everything in North Seattle had all the parks it needed, and I found out now that after they had the tree coverage, but not all the parks they wanted. And the neighborhoods that had the parks were the neighborhoods where people had left the south end to live in the north end. So the same disparate outcomes were occurring. So I want to tell you, wow, what an age. God, local government, this is not a dull period. I mean, who wants to wake up in the morning and say, oh God, it's really a boring day? No, gosh, no. You want this because it is so defining. You're not talking about the now, you're talking about what's going to happen 2 to 3 generations from now. You're talking about what we're going to build it. This is a world that's going to be it's going to be without mercy. China's going to have the world's largest economy. India's going to be second, and we're going to be a strong economy as well. But we're going to be eclipsed as the world changes, and we see that all the time now. And I'm pretty, I love this country, and my whole issue is, I'll be danged if we're going to run for second to anybody. We don't run. It's first or nothing. And there's a reason why. We're the world's grand experiment. Never before has there been an assembly of a nation that gathered, that became a world power, militarily and economically, without a common gene pool. Ever in the history of this country, or the world. We are the grand experiment. And so if we fail to resolve the issues of race in our communities so that we actually know, so all of a sudden we're sitting there and after my 25 years in office, I can look and say there are kids who are failing because of my neglect and indifference, and I wish I knew then what I know now. So I've been telling the new exec, the new mayor, you got to deal with it, and they're being very, very aggressive publicly on these issues by doing measurements and reports on the equity issues, who wins and who loses. I was part of a grant team looking on the West, all the West Coast. We weren't supposed to, they're going to use the report. And we interviewed people, just look at data. We said, what does the data say? Which communities win, which communities lose, and why? And it was interesting, the communities that were willing to acknowledge disparities are the ones that we saw the greatest movement on. Because to acknowledge them and then do data sets to find out what those are, and then to act on those data sets meant we saw recovery in those neighborhoods. So it's important to cities, it's important to our domestic tranquility, it's important for our national competitiveness. But I know that one of those kids who lost out in King County would have been Michelangelo. And I will go to my grave realizing that Michelangelo didn't have his chance because I did not put parks, playgrounds, art opportunities. I did not deal with the fact that a person had epigenetic problems because of cortisol in their system, and so therefore they became angry rather than artists. So it's in your hands. In your hands. You have a great organization, though, that has, I was looking at the list of people what I can tell you tomorrow. I was going to go, oh, wow. I mean, that's called a feast. I mean, if you walk out here saying it was boring, no, it's impossible. You cannot. It is a feast of expertise and ideas. But on the issue of race and equity, we're going to have Fergusons and we're going to have more of them. The data tells us that that is only the tip of the iceberg. And I used to remember some of my memos reading Isabel Ferguson's book again, with Martha Brothers Sons. Why do we have race riots? And when do they occur and why? And she articulates, because she was a reporter. She didn't write a fiction. She used was a reporter, kind of a historical book. She said, these are the reasons why we have race riots in Topeka. Here's what happened in Wisconsin. Here's what happened in Chicago, New York. And I remember sending a memo saying, we have this at a scale we've never seen. For people to think that there's not going to be more volatility, it means they have stuck their head in the sand. But it doesn't mean we have to have more volatility. The issue is quick action, empowerment, being decisive, and saying, here are decisions. People only erupt when they think there is no opportunity whatsoever. Whatsoever. When I was in college, I was threatened to shut down I was student body president, I was also the VSU president. My father called me on the phone and said, I saw you on TV, but I really was hoping you'd graduate. And I said to my dad, you and Mom were demonstrators. I grew up in a home where we demonstrated. I said, Daddy, I used to joke, we didn't know our last name because everybody called us all kinds of names but Sim. Because you guys didn't think that the racial makeup of my hometown was satisfactory. An opportunity for not being presented. So I just learned from my parents. So he said, Bud, we were hoping you were going to graduate. And he sent me a letter. And it came by one of those special delivery things. And he said to us, Bud, we'll pay your bail. The college president called me the same morning and said, we will agree to all 22 of your demands. And I said to him, he says, because I never realized that we had students so lonely. We had no faculty, no recruitment efforts, couldn't even cosmetics. We had to drive to Yakima or Seattle to get our own cosmetics. Record station banned black records. Couldn't get, you're talking about Stevie Wonder, Martha Medell, not exactly risque. So, he said, I just never realized that we made you nothing. We made you nothing. There's no reason for anybody today. The data's there, and nobody should be nothing. But when they are nothing, you're going to be angry. And when they're nothing, you're going to ask them, why did they do what they did? And they're going to tell you, wait, I had nothing to lose. And you're going to say, you had this to lose. And they said, no, we had nothing to lose. I talk about my kids, and I'll close on this. My son Douglas is a librarian, which is absolutely a miracle. Because I can remember, I said, Doug, did you read books in high school? Because the report card didn't indicate that. I said, I got notes from his teachers weekly. And I got one note from the school that said, Dear Mr. Sims, thank you for volunteering to be the parent chaperone on the Mount Rainier climb. And I said to my wife, look what the sadist did to me this time. So I knew it was him. I knew that. I could feel it in my bones. I mean, Mount Rainier, 14,000 feet high. It's cold. You're taking in 1/3 of oxygen that you're taking in right now sitting here. You can't run up the mountain. You can't even stroke the mountain. You got to take a foot and breathe, another foot and breathe. So I remember saying to myself, I had all kinds of processes, sublimation, repression, all that kind of stuff. But I knew I wasn't going up that mountain. So I remember going to the first meeting they had. He said, Mr. Sims, you're working number 4. I went to my doctor the next day on schedule. And I sat there to him and he comes down and says, Mike, I need to know something. You've been my doctor for what now? 19 years? He said, yeah. I need to know whether you're a doctor, patient, or Mike and Ron. And he says, well, why? Well, obviously, I mean, aren't we Mike and Ron? I said, Doc, I need a medical reason not to climb Mount Rainier. He said, friends don't tell friends to lie. So I remember going back to the sessions with these young people, 16, 17. 16-year-old men say that young women are weak, and that kind of ends it. And then when that wasn't enough, they said, where are they going to go to the bathroom? Young women looked at young men and said, obnoxious and careless, and therefore would lead us into every crevasse on the side of them. And then young people looked at people my age and said, too old. There are some things that a mountain teaches you, a Mount Rainier teaches you a lot. Teaches you the things greater than yourself. There's a place where the clouds flirt with you. They dance so beautifully. Dance. and they dance. There's air that is so fresh, it is sweet to body and soul, and so cold, it's appetizing. There's a place that you can look at a horizon and realize that the horizon is endless, it goes forever. And if the moon, sun does wink at you and says, I'll see you tomorrow morning, and you can lay on a glacier, just lay there, and you can touch every star. Every star. I was on a rope team with 3 young women. They said, Mr. Sims, are you ready? I said, yep. And they pulled me up at the mountain, because young women don't climb up mountains, they fly up mountains. Young women can handle heavier loads, and people my age know that mountains, literally and figuratively, are conquered one step at a time. But the lessons I learned from that mountain climb was that everybody counts on a rope team. You're as strong as the weakest member in a rope team, and you're as fast as the slowest member in a rope team. Everybody counts. We have to learn as city officials and government officials, elected officials, everybody counts. You cannot move forward. You cannot have a good idea until somebody has a good idea for you, unless they own it. They've got to own it. And you've got to work at getting them to own it. Don't come in there and tell me I got something good for you, Ron, because if I don't think it's good for me, I am already stopped. But tell me you want to work with me on something, then you might be able to get me. Everybody counts on a rope team. Everybody counts. The only way you can sum it is with them. And my final closing is, I grew up at 1218 Fifth Avenue, Spokane, Washington, 99202. Area code 509-535-3601. I want to see my where I grew up when I was in Spokane for a meeting. I went there and I was walking down the street, past my old high school, past my grant school, and I went down to 1218 Fifth Avenue. It's interesting because the house has unchanged, primarily, it's a little bit because it's painted. There were no Delphines or Dodges or Nashes in front of the house. And my mom, or my dad, came to the window, opened the curtain to wave at us because I came home. Nor will they ever again wave to me, now that I'm gone, when I leave. I am the last of a family of 5. The last. So I think about that at times. Then I look at everybody in this room. Everybody in this room. All of you. A higher authority than anybody in this room determined your job is not done. It was not to be lived with mediocrity, it was to be lived with magnificence. Your job is not done. It's an incredible endorsement of you as individuals and of the responsibilities that you have been given. So on behalf of my granddaughter who's perfect, my two granddaughters who are perfect, and my 2 grandsons that are more than perfect, I want you to do extraordinary things. Because in this country, people take every idea that works here and they'll put it in their community. I want my granddaughter's life to be better than mine. I want my grandson's life to be better than mine. I want them to remember that I'm the only one left of 5, and I too will be gone. But my parents dreamed, my grandparents dreamed, and I dreamed, and you dreamed, and we gave them a better world. Thank you very much.